Right, let's move down now to our third and final joint. So this is our dovetail joint, and it really is a super joint. But if you look closely at it, you can see that it is basically a comb joint or finger joint with slanted edges. You can see these slanted angles better in the 2D drawing that I've got here. These are the pins, and of course this shape is called the dovetail. To get the dovetail angle, we go 8 units down here and 1 across. So we have a ratio of 8:1. But that is for hardwoods. Where softwoods, we can do this a little bit smaller to compensate for the slightly weaker wood. So we say 6:1 for a softwood. And if we do the dovetail too wide like this, then we end up again with the short grain, which we know is weak. And if the angle is too shallow, then what will happen is that the dovetail will drop down make a gap between that and the pin. So let's imagine that we have got a 16mm piece of oak here, and that would mean that basically we'd have to come in 2mm there. Now that's not easy to measure, is it? 2mm. So what we can do is use this little jig, which already has the angles placed on it. And we can use this jig to just line up, drop it onto the top of the wood like this and mark our line. And the same on here, there's like a brass piece in the middle there that sits on top of the wood, and then we mark our angle. And that's our dovetail jig, which is just really handy to get it really accurate. Lots and lots and lots of times, which we're going to use on this dovetail joint. Now you can use any number of dovetails on your joint, but what you want to do is try and make sure that the narrowest part of your pin doesn't drop below 6mm. Otherwise it will become too weak. Now there's a fair bit of working out to do, particularly if you're going to use a couple of pins, or even more. Let's just give you an example. If we start off with 80 here millimeters, then what we can say is that we don't want the pins here dropping down any lower than 6mm. So that would be 18mm in total. And we're taking that away from the 80mm width, which would leave us with 62mm. Now, if we've got 2 pins and 2 dovetails, then we can divide that by 2, which will give us then 31. So it means that we've got 31mm here for the top of the tails, 31. And then if we are going down, let's say the thickness of this is 16mm, then we have to come in 2mm to make that angle there, which means that we have lost 4mm off the 31, which to my reckoning would make this 27mm at the bottom. So these dovetails would still be very strong. So I'd use a pencil to mark everything out, and avoid the sharp hard lines of the marking gauge, because we're going to cut this with a saw. I'll show you shortly. But also please make sure that you mark on the pieces of the wood that you want to remove with the hatching lines. You're going to get it wrong. I tell you for sure that it will be wrong. And don't forget the tri-square and ruler, pencil and jig are all going to help you mark this out. And to cut the joint, I'm going to use a dovetail saw. Yeah, that's it. A saw specially designed to cut the dovetails out. And it looks very much like a tenon saw, but it has finer teeth. And this will enable it to get, a much more sort of accurate cut where we need it down the dovetails and, across the pins here. Whoops, cut outside the line there. sometimes they show the difference because it has a slightly different looking handle, but otherwise you just have to check the teeth. And again, we'll use the coping saw to cut across to remove the block of wood which is in between the dovetails, and also the block here which is here on the pins. Now there's going to be a lot of tidying up to do, so we're going to use this, which is called a bevel edged chisel, and this is specially designed with slanted sides, and this is a 2D cross section of the chisel here. You can see the sides sloped allow you to get near to the, or dead on to the dovetail on this side, and on this side as well when you are cutting. You can get smaller ones also which will fit in between. Just pop that down there, and this allows us to pare the joint, which really means just to take off little slivers of wood so that you get all the dovetails fitting into the pins. You can pair any of the joints which I've shown you over the last few videos. Now here we go. Here are the tails. They're going over the dovetail like so. It's the only way to put this joint in, because if I try and lift up, I can't lift up those pins. They're going to be fixed in place by the wedge of the dovetail. And this is where the dovetail gets its incredible strength, because the more you pull down on this area, the more the dovetail will wedge itself into the pins. Now some carpenters can really get these very tight indeed, and they say that they don't need PVA glue, but I think for you and me we're best gluing up these joints. And look how great these dovetails look on this cuddly toy box. There we go, he's peeping out. But yeah, it looks absolutely fantastic. And here's another example of a drawer, and can you see the way that they've positioned these dovetails so that when you pull the drawer this way, that the dovetails will be at their strongest. Here they've used two colors to accentuate the look of the joint, and also you can see here that this is a stopped dovetail joint because you can't see really anything at the front here, only on the sides. Yeah, okay, why go to all that effort just to hide the joint and then show it when you open the drawer? Who knows? These are just carpenters having fun. Now I've no doubt that you'll be able to make all of these joints in solid timbers, but now we need to really turn our attention to manufactured boards, which are going to cause us a little bit of a problem. Now, hopefully you've seen my video on manufactured boards. If not, well, that's something to look forward to, isn't it? Here we're going to compare them with the joints which we've discussed over the last few videos. As you can see, there's going to be a lot of permutations that we can have. So I don't really intend to cover them all, but I want you to think a little bit about my reasoning as I go through this. And then that will allow you to make your own decisions. I'm going to take hardboard out of the equation really, because okay, you can nail it onto thicker pieces of wood, but what else can you do with it? It's really just for a backing of a cupboard, so nailing will be suffice. With the compressed boards, you're going to have problems sort of putting the nail through the surface. So to drive something through a thick piece, which is maybe at the top of the joint, is going to be incredibly difficult. Particularly on pieces like plywood, I wouldn't like to try and get a nail through all those surfaces there. If it's a thin piece that we're dealing with, then of course you're going to have less problem. You're just going to see your nails bend before you get them through the surface. But where you've got the natural timbers, then you should be okay. The best reinforced butt joint will be the screw joint, and that will be fine for all of these materials, no problem. So that would be my first go-to joint when I'm using these manufactured boards. Of course, I'd also look at KD fittings, and that's in a separate video for you to check out. I mean, a dowel joint, will work as well, but you've also got to think about why would you be doing that for these manufactured boards? Because in a lot of these boards, you're just using them for maybe outdoor construction work. With MDF, you might make a box, but then, the final finish you want to paint over, so that's going to hide all your work. So what's the point of going to that sort of trouble? But with these other more decorative surface that we could put into a piece of furniture, then it might be worthwhile. With the frame joints like the, say, cross-halving or the mortise and tenon joint, I'll just put M&T there, mortise and tenon joint, you're removing material, and you're going to make these materials a lot sort of weaker by removing it. And you're going to have problems where we've got materials with layers, where you've got to cut halfway through a layer to get the distance that you require. Yeah, it's not particularly good. Chiseling materials, also manufactured boards, chiseling them, it's not designed for that. You need a different process. And then although you're going to regain some strength by gluing it all back together again, I just think it's just too difficult to do and not worth the trouble. I'm much more optimistic of you succeeding if you're going to use a housing joint. Remember, with this one, we're just going to cut out like a shallow slot, so we're not actually removing much of the material, and then our shelf will fit in. So, this is very suitable, and you're going to see this a lot on manufactured boards. So yeah, go ahead, use it. I think it's going to work. Now, the finger joint, remember, is a decorative joint, and you're going to really cut into that material, aren't you, and create really small sections. So it's not going to work really for these materials here. I have seen it done on MDF, but again, you've got to ask yourself, if you're going to paint it over, what's the point of doing all of that? You might as well have used a screw joint and filled it in. However, people are finding real success with using laser cut finger joints, and that's making up some really nice boxes. So the laser cut ones can be quite fun. Laser cut. With lambing board, you've got to be really careful, because you really don't know where these bits of wood are in your joint when you start to work this out. So if you've got all these pieces of wood glued together, and then you want to put something in like a finger joint, you might find that the fingers have got all of these little separate joints inside, and when you cut them that small, then they're going to break. And then we get to the dovetail joint. Now, okay, come on. Why do we want to have a beautiful joint like this in any of these materials? Because they're based on the wood grain strength, and none of these materials here have any wood grain in them. So it's just the wrong joint to use. Please don't do it. It's probably possible to do it in plywood, but again, it's so difficult. And how are you going to pair your joints so that, you get them nice and snugly fitting? And the lambing board, well, you're going to have the same problem as we had here. So if you ask me, let's just leave the dovetail for the natural solid timbers. Come on, that's what it's designed for.